Alrighty. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rachel Ellenberger. I'm the Industry Engagement Manager for the North American Council for Freight Efficiency and the moderator for today's webinar. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. And if you've been here before, welcome back. Today is our 5th bootcamp session of the Run on Less Messy Middle series and the 2nd session for the battery electric vehicle unit. Next slide, please. So as always, I'd like to take just a moment here to thank ACT News for all of the support to make this bootcamp series possible. If you are not a subscriber, you can use the link on the screen to do so. Keep up with all of the latest news in clean tech and the commercial transportation industry. Next slide, please. And this is our last session before the ACT conference next week. And if you've waited until now to register, you can still get a discount on registration using the code on your screen. NACFE will be there. We will be at booth 6033, so be sure to come and say hi while you're there. Next slide, please. And we'll do just a quick review of our schedule. As I mentioned, this is the 5th session for the overall bootcamp, the 2nd session for our battery electric vehicle unit. In 2 weeks, we'll be back here for the last battery electric vehicle session before our 2-hour workshop. Next slide, please. And now I will turn it over to our Executive Director, Mike Roth, with a quick update from the run. Mike.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining for these bootcamp sessions. I always learn so much in them and looking forward to getting to the panelists. Quick update on the run. Our next big effort or action is a breakfast next week at ACT Expo, where all 13 fleets will be talking about their work on decarbonizing long-haul trucking and in particular what they're going to showcase during the run in September. So they're going to be going through, okay, what kind of trucks are they operating? Is it diesel with different kinds of biodiesel, renewable diesel, et cetera? Is it natural gas, battery electric, or hydrogen fuel cell? What the routes might be, where the locations are, a little bit about their business and why they chose to step up and be part of the run. All 3 of the fleet speakers and Dave Mullaney have been really involved in the whole Run on Less series with Purelator being in, I think, 2 runs, and NFI was in the Run on Less Electric in 21 and Schneider in 23. So thanks for you guys. They know what it takes to be on the leading or bleeding edge of some of these technologies, and then to be able to be willing to share the good and bad and sometimes the ugly of that with our audience at Run on Less is really very cool and not is very much appreciated, because it's one thing to do the work, and then it's another thing to talk publicly about it. But at NACFE, we believe, and I think probably everybody on this, is you only get better if you share what's going right to make sure we keep those things going well, and then we know what's not working. And then there's always, in my mind, there's like 2 kinds of not working. There's the not working, but we know there's a lot of work going on in the industry to mitigate it and make those risks go away. And then there's the other things that aren't working that we really just don't have faith that what's going on is going to fix those issues. So, the fleets are all stepping up to share and help us learn and help us all in whatever part of this we're in any of these technologies to get better. So with that, thanks for joining, and I'll turn it back over to Rachel and the experts we've got here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mike. If we can go to the next slide here, as always, we have a couple of items of housekeeping to review before I officially introduce our panel today. First, I would like to thank this session's sponsor, Prologis. Thank you so much to Prologis for your ongoing support to ensure that we can still provide programs like these to our audience. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about our quiz. So make sure that you head back to the landing page for this session on runonless.com to take the quiz today. Our speakers have sent in questions about the topics that we'll be covering today. Once you've successfully completed your quiz, you'll provide us with your contact information to be entered into a drawing to win some Messy Middle swag. So you'll see the Google form to provide this information once you receive a 100% on your quiz. Next slide, please. And then just our final reminders here, this session is being recorded. The session itself and the slides will be posted on runonless.com later this week. If you did not get the chance to submit a question on the registration form for our speakers today, but you would like to do so, your Q&A controls are in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. During the Q&A, I'll be relaying your questions to our speakers, so make sure that if there's something that you're curious about, you send that in. And then if you have any technical issues whatsoever, we have Stephen Babcock with ACT News here to help you troubleshoot. His email address is on the screen, so be sure to reach out if you're having any difficulties. And we'll go to our next slide here where I will officially introduce our panel. Thank you so much for our panelists for being here. Our first presentation today will be from Chris Henry, who is the Director of Fleets for Purolator. Chris, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Rachel. Appreciate that, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to take you a little bit through our journey on electrification and start to talk to you a little bit about how we've gotten to where we are today, and a little bit about what some of our challenges have been as we've gone through the electrification process, specifically when we're talking about heavy-duty vehicles as opposed to some of the medium-duty vehicles that we put forward. Next slide, please. So it all really begins with our plan and our goals and what we were trying to achieve as an organization. So approximately 5 years ago, we started to set out what our 2030 goals would be. And as you can see from the slide, we took a look at multiple facets inside of our business: facilities, waste, transportation, and also in innovation. And to get to our goals, we knew we had to start to measure, to take a look at what's going to be the key drivers of getting to our ambition to be the greenest courier in Canada. And you can see from the slide, part of our mission was to, certainly on the transportation side, was to evoke the change, to begin to make the bigger changes and to drive what's going to be the biggest contributors to our success from a GHG perspective. So our goals were to electrify 60% of our fleet, to get a GHG reduction of our scope 1 and 2 by 42%, to get to 100% renewable electricity, and 70% diversion of hazardous waste from landfill. So some pretty lofty and aggressive goals that we considered for ourselves to try and put forward. Next slide, please. And the bulk of this to get to there is going to be driven from our fleet emissions. Our scope 1 and 2 from our own fleet are our biggest components. And while we certainly looked at all the elements of our business, we knew that this was going to be the biggest and probably the largest and most challenging one to get to. And so again, as I said, we started this journey 4 years ago, and we'll go to the next slide, please. And part of that of doing that was understanding how we were going to get there and what would be our business case approach to being able to do it. So you can see, start with big assumptions, socialize early, and a couple others that you can read through there yourself. But the biggest part of it was recognize that slow and steady wins the race. And we understood from the beginning that getting involved in EVs at all levels of our business, and I'll talk to that in a minute, was going to be a challenge for us. That we weren't going to get to it overnight, and that we had to make sure that we took our teams and our staff, our people with us along the way as we went through this, because there's not only the technological evolution, but there's a large kind of people evolution that goes along with this. So we realized the time frame that we had to have to manage through this. Next slide, please. So when we went through this, we had to take a look at what would be our key considerations to get to our EV journey and how we would get there. Now, our fleet consists of over 6,000 vehicles, medium-duty vehicles, what we call our P&D, pickup and delivery vans, straight trucks, tractors, trailers. So but the predominant vehicle we have is a medium-duty vehicle. So as we went through and started to do our assessment of where we needed to get to, we had to take a look at multiple factors across our business. And you can see from the bottom of the slide, we had to take a multifaceted view of all the elements that were going to impact how we would get to electrification, and electrification of each different type of vehicle as we went through our business. So grid emission intensity, service upgrade requirements, utility costs, and what it really came down to at the bottom is the right vehicle for the right route. Being able to ensure that we could make sure you get our range on our vehicles, that our vehicles could go back and forth on a daily basis to their terminals, and that they could manage the payload. So as we went through all the key considerations, one of the things we decided upon early was we're going to go with medium-duty vehicles. The heavy-duty vehicles we're going to rely on a little bit later, mainly because of issues around service upgrades, utility support, these kinds of things. It was going to be a little more difficult for us to get to the heavy-duty side. But we knew we also wanted to be future preparing for it at the same time. So as I take you through the presentation, you'll see some of the work we did to kind of future-proof a little bit of that as we went through. But Again, our focus was on medium duty, and I'll take you through some of those reasons as well. But the heavier duty vehicles, we knew we had to kind of delay a little bit as we went through. Next slide, please. So we had multiple test plan objectives as we went through for all of our vehicles and for electrification in general. And this was going to apply no matter what vehicle we did. We were going to take a look at all the parameters that we needed to understand about deploying EV vehicles and what would those measures of success would be. So we've highlighted here some ones in red that were really the difference for us to understand how we were going to be successful and what were the key ones that were going to help us understand where we were going to continue moving forward. So there's certainly operating parameters, efficiency and inefficiency of the vehicles and the financials, but there's a balancing act there that we had to manage. A lot of that had to do with capital and capital outlay, but it was also about performance and then ensuring that we hit our GHG objectives as a part of that. So as we go forward and starting to deploy and ensuring we deploy successfully, we wanted to make sure we had a path to success. And starting off with medium duty vehicles was that path. And that's another one of the reasons we went through it, was because the financial path as well as the operating path made sense for us in the early phases of getting towards 2030. Next slide, please. So we began to do our infrastructure installations. And as I said, what we tried to do was future-proof. Once we started understanding what we needed to do was not only have, and what you're seeing here is a lot of level 2 installations, but we had to ensure we did level 3. But at the same time, we had to manage for our business use case, working both inside and outside. How would we plug vehicles in? How would we deploy on a daily basis? And again, what made sense for our operations at the time? How could we actually deploy vehicles effectively? And as we went through, certainly going with the medium duty and the level 2 was the right way to go for us initially. But again, we had to ensure that we made ourselves ready and prepared for the eventuality of getting into those heavy vehicles. Again, we have over 500 tractors, over 250 straight trucks. So we had to make sure that our installations at some point in time would support that. Next slide. So this is just an example here of our medium duty vehicles, what we needed to do internally, how we had to string some pieces from the top. And so as we charge our vehicles, much of it is done indoors. So we're having to prepare not only to charge our level 2, but our level 3 vehicles. Just another example of how we were able to go through and manage that. Next slide. What we also needed to do was to take a look at different variants of how we install our charging. So we have a lot of outside charging as well. And again, this is a solution we had to put in place where we couldn't actually get enough power, which was one of the reasons that would limit us from a level 3 perspective in some of the heavy duties, to make sure we had a separate power source. So this was a solution where we brought in a separate outside power source from the building that allowed us to charge not only level 2, but level 3 vehicles, a heavy duty vehicle that we do have in place. And so again, we've had to kind of, over the course of several years, just kind of pivot a little bit to ensure that as we started to change the vehicle type of what we're going to do, that we had the capability of doing it. And so this is another example of how we got there effectively to manage that. This is essentially a 20-foot sea container powered from an outside source that then allows us to charge vehicles along a path outside. It doesn't allow us to load inside, but what it does is give us the capability to charge multiple types of vehicles at the same time. Next slide, please. So where we are today is we've actually deployed over 250 medium-duty electric vehicles. It's been very successful for us. We were able to meet all of the goals that we're trying to achieve in terms of vehicle deployment, reducing fuel costs, getting the GHG savings, but also making sure that operationally we can return to base at any point in time. So it's very key for us to ensure that the operational side of the business is effective. So on the medium side, we've actually proven it and gotten to there. Next slide, please. So we actually have deployed one heavy-duty vehicle, but we certainly have had several barriers to our heavy-duty deployment, and certainly the cost and timing of infrastructure and around service upgrades has been one of the areas that has kind of slowed us in our ability to deploy. And even from the initial side, it actually stopped us from going initially. Supply chain risks and long lead times to acquire the equipment have also been there. I'm sure many of you have experienced switchgear challenges, transformer challenges. No different for us, and more so on the heavy duty side. The other, when you look at financially, it's the cost of heavy duties that have been a bit of a barrier for us at the same time. and as well as the availability of the various types of vehicles. And the ones that actually meet our use case has been a bit of a challenge for us at the same time. So we've only deployed one heavy duty vehicle to date, but we are still planning to go forward. But if you go to the next slide, we've identified some of the challenges that from a widespread adoption, where what we're seeing that have led us not the inability essentially to really deliver quickly. Infrastructure development, what we need to have here from the infrastructure is a large network of fast charging stations, particularly along freight hubs and highways. Cost competitiveness, getting that price of that vehicle and that battery down will be another area that will allow us to be able to deploy, and I think a larger group to deploy the vehicles. Battery technology improvements, I think, is another key one, which goes with the cost competitiveness. How do we make sure that the batteries are capable of delivering, and working across all types of ranges for all types of use cases? Regulatory support, implementing policies that support infrastructure development. I think there's lots of incentives and components out there. I'm not a supporter of incentives for vehicles, but I am a supporter of incentives to support infrastructure. How can governments, local, municipal, federal, support that deployment of infrastructure is a key piece. And then finally, partnerships to increase access for small and medium fleets. And this is really about, high tide floats all boats. We are a larger fleet. We do have, significantly more capital than some others. How can we all work together as industries, manufacturers, governments now to give everybody access to at least trial, to test, to get involved in a wider adoption of heavy duty vehicles? Because the more of us that get engaged, the more of us can get involved. Again, those elements up above, infrastructure, cost, battery, they all become less of a barrier to accessibility. So the more we can get more people involved in is kind of where we're trying to help and support as much as possible. But again, I think the key really around heavy duty vehicles here to me is that infrastructure and developing that infrastructure that helps support so that we can get the vehicles on the road quickly, but that they can also serve the operational need of each of the different fleets. So that's my presentation for today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris. And we can advance to the next slide. And I believe that our second presenter, her slide starts at the next one here. So next up, we have Alexa Branco, who is the Director of Sustainability for NFI. Alexa, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I will pass it over to you.
Thanks, Rachel. Happy to be here. So going to go through a little bit of NFI overview and our journey here on the sustainability side, so we can move forward to the next slide. So NFI is a private family-owned company. We are well into over 90 years of business, and you may be familiar with our blue trucks, but we also have over 73 million square feet of warehouse space that we operate, as well as a real estate team that will deploy buildings that we also own and can operate as well. So moving over to the next slide. Sustainability is really within the NFI values. So since 2012, when we really started some natural gas trucks and solar deployments within our owned real estate, we just found that this value kind of stuck true to who we were in helping our customers and just the world in general, and being that change that we wanted to see. So we'll move over to the next slide. Diving into just an overview of some of the opportunities now that we're working with. So we'll dive into trucks and get into some of the projects on that side. Obviously our electric tractor fleet right now is in Southern California. Excited to be able to move that outside of that state. We've got a couple of electric yard tractors running in Texas with electric yard trucks deploying this year, middle of the year into Virginia. So excited there, but of course, as Chris mentioned, infrastructure is very important. Especially when you look at right now, our diesel purchases are mostly over the road. We do have some bulk fuel tanks, but most of that is going to be over the road. So definitely having support in infrastructure is going to help lead this charge. So right now we do have 10 350 kilowatt fast chargers at our Ontario site, with another 10 within our Chino campuses. We are working to finally stand up and finish our JETSI project, which we'll get into in another slide here. And of course, then on the warehousing side, just to make note of, installing solar panels as well as operating electric forklifts within the walls of the warehouse as well. So we'll move over to the next slide. And what really started for us on the battery electric side was actually Tesla coming out in, I think it was 2018, 2019, with their Tesla Semi. And that got a lot of our customers asking questions. And then, of course, the regulations got introduced, and it really expedited this process. But that's when we were able to do pilots with both Daimler and Volvo. So with both of those, we were able to run close to 1.5 million miles with those pilots between both of those tractors, 14 trucks overall, and really led us into getting, our hands on production units. So those pilots, were, as Mike likes to say, the bleeding edge, but, definitely didn't see as many hiccups on the tractor side as we did on the infrastructure side. And we'll move over to the next slide here and talk a little bit about JETSI. So our big grant and big project where we really took on our own infrastructure project was our JETSI grant in Ontario, California. So we are still working to finalize this project. It was announced in 2021 with hopes to, complete this by 2022 in the original state. But what we had found with this project, so we were deploying 50 vehicles and obviously charging for those vehicles. But on top of that, we were looking to future-proof, which I think is a really good call out that Chris had mentioned, previously here of, the future-proof piece of it. If you're going to dig up the, the concrete or the asphalt that you have, right, what can we put in there to kind of withstand, the future of your fleet or the future power that you may need. So for us, we decided to put solar on the warehouse next door that would feed into battery storage, and making that decision classified us into a microgrid, which we, weren't familiar with the utility regulations. To be fair, the utility didn't necessarily call it out yet either until it was a little too late. And Chris also mentioned, switch gears and all of the fun of delays. So that was what had happened for this project, is once we got classified into having a microgrid, they then classified us needing a medium voltage switchgear instead of the low. And that brought out our project to over 2 years of just to wait to get that switchgear. And of course, there was further delays along that. So definitely a learning curve, definitely the bleeding edge, but it's still, we were able to deploy those 50 trucks ahead of schedule without, standing up all of our infrastructure. And that really shows, the partners that you have to make and the partners that will help lead you through these challenging times. You definitely want to make sure that you've got all of your subject matter experts to kind of help you along the way and through this journey. For us, we were able to pivot and get some temporary power. And that was, important to at least still stick to our overall schedule that, continues to help us with the rolling blackouts out there and kind of just give us a little bit on that time of use tariff fee that also, is affecting in California when, if you're charging at a specific time, you will have a higher rate to pay, right, per kilowatt hour. So can head into the next slide just to give an overview of really where we're at now. So we have now driven over 5.5 million zero emission miles. That is our battery electric day cab fleet. So, as noted, we've had electric yard tractors, deployed 27 of them back actually in 2019, and that OEM didn't work out too well for us. So we have now deployed 3 different OEMs and have 18 in our fleet. So those have been working out tremendously. That is definitely a piece that fits well for us. And I think as we're, exploring, just as Chris kind of went through his fleet and how you kind of manage what can switch to battery electric, it's really right for us. We looked at, are they going to be returning to the same place? and how long is those deliveries, and drayage works for us. So that's why we were able to do the Ontario, California project, knowing that that was our port services and drayage fleet. And then funding and regulations kind of come tied along with that. So what states are having regulations will also impact and impacted our decisions, of course. But then the funding piece comes into play. And of course, we were able to get funding for JETSI. We still had, our own bills to pay on that respect as well. And, think that we've been able to see the benefits already of deploying this and being able to support our customers in a different way. So with, regulations changing and funding changing, we've also now pivoted and been able to explore different opportunities. So excited that we now have some private funding coming to us for our Virginia fleet and our deployment in battery electric. So, there's people that want to reduce their emissions. It may not be your direct customer, but there's still different ways that can happen. So we'll move over to the next slide. And just to wrap it up, just looking forward, really looking to finish our deployment in Southern California, having our full 1 megawatt of solar feeding into that 7.7 megawatt hours of battery storage, just to really help us with the costs and reliability. And then just different partnerships. We want to continue piloting Tesla. We've piloted the Tesla Semi. We're looking forward to, looking at piloting the Windrose as well, but some of those longer range functionalities that can fit for some of our longer range fleets. Of course, drayage is not our only business, but the battery electric trucks we're running now really work well there, as well as those electric yard tractors really being that ROI positive for us. So some other things, of course, electric reefers that we want to start looking into, hydrogen fuel cells. So the list goes on, and I think for battery electric specifically, it really just we've seen where it was in 2019, and the growth that we've had since then has already exacerbated. So we believe that we will see these costs for the battery to come down. We believe that infrastructure will continue to, increase. We'll have these different partnerships. We announced today our partnership with Prologis, and excited to be able to continue making different depots for our electric vehicles and continue these projects. So looking forward to being on the bleeding edge. And, I think that anybody that's been around the trucking industry for a long time knows that, this type of thing happens frequently. And you just kind of have to keep rolling with it. And as the issues come up, get a good team together and work through it. So definitely biggest piece of advice is partnerships and having a bunch of people to call on.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alexa. This was great. I'll call you back for our Q&A at the end here. I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Jeremy Hawk, who is the Engineering and Sustainability Manager for Schneider. Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us. I will hand it over to you now.
All right, thanks, Rachel. So we're actually going to kick off my Schneider portion here with a video. Quick disclaimer, you may want to just slightly adjust your speakers or your headphones. Sometimes the volume can come through a little loud, but next slide, we'll kick it off with a video. Perfect. If we can just jump ahead to the next slide. There we go. So hopefully that provides kind of a little bit of context into the evolution, of course, of Schneider over the course of the last 90 years here. Things have changed quite considerably, but our focus today is to look at the most recent transition, and that is our 92 battery electric trucks that we've deployed in South El Monte, California. Similar to that of Alexis and the NFI group, this was heavily supported via the JETSI grant funding. The operation itself is a 24/7, 365 local intermodal drayage operation. So these trucks are running in a constant loop. On average, each driver shift is about 177 miles. But because of the operational configuration of this fleet, we slip seat these trucks, and a large portion of the trucks are running multiple shifts per day. And we'll get into a little bit more of what the infrastructure is that we installed, but we're able to operate these trucks in the manner in which we do because we're able to charge them to 80% in about 90 minutes across the 16 chargers on site. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So I think one of the biggest items here, and some of the prior presenters had touched on it as well, this is a long runway. There are absolutely going to be some delays. Those delays might be 2 weeks, they might be months, they could be, in some cases, years, depending on the severity of it. But as we look at our El Monte operation, this was really a 4-year runway. Between partnering with our grant partners and working through the components that came along with that, while simultaneously working with the local utilities, charging manufacturer, truck manufacturer. These projects take time, especially to do it at scale, at the scale in which we did. We've done some smaller projects as well that we've been able to accomplish in much shorter durations. But as we've looked at some of our other sites as well, we've heard much longer durations. So the root of the story here is, as we look at this specific operation, this was a 4-year runway to be able to get us to a completed deployment in its entirety. But it didn't come without its fair share of challenges, and luckily we only had some short delays. But this is a very realistic timeline to be able to do these types of rollouts and transition a fleet in its entirety, or an operation in its entirety. And the thing to understand there is to just be very concise with your planning process, and then always have a little bit of a buffer in there to be able to offset accordingly for any potentially unexpected delays. Next slide, please. So from an infrastructure standpoint, what did we really install? What supports these 92 trucks? The infrastructure itself, that actual downstream utility upgrades, modifications, site build out, that itself was a 2-year process, and it did have to go back to site up or downstream utility modifications back to the substation to be able to support the 1.2, actually they're actually 1.5 kilowatt, or I'm sorry, 1.5 megawatt power cabinets that we have firmware derated down to 1.2 megawatts that then feed our 16 350 kilowatt parallel capable chargers. It's ultimately 16,000 square feet in scale on site. And as you think about the overall energy consumption it takes to completely transition a fleet of this scale, it's really the equivalent of putting a small town within 16,000 square feet. So our daily energy consumption is that of the equivalent of about 2,000 homes. So I say all that because the energy consumption is considerable, that relationship and communication that needs to be had with the utility is critical. It needs to be done well ahead of time to be able to plan accordingly and set yourself up for success to scale like this. Next slide, please. So in terms of, so we've been 2 years of operation now. What is that really equated to? We have delivered over 6 million miles zero emission with our battery electric trucks. So that's the equivalent to 20 million pounds of carbon dioxide emissions being avoided, or essentially the equivalent of taking 2,100 gas-powered vehicles off of the road each year. Next slide. So from a learning standpoint, I've touched on a few of these items already. I'll hit on them absolutely again. Expect delays, whether that's grid delays, whether that is equipment delays. You will absolutely run into some challenges. And being able to plan accordingly, adjust the schedule as necessary, working with your contractors to be able to meet these delays and timelines is a challenging undertaking, but it's the reality of being able to scale to this level with especially Class 8 trucks that require such a significant power draw. Permitting again as well is one of those things to work with your local municipalities very early to ensure that you've got the support and documentation necessary there to get their sign off. Similarly, because of the long runway that comes along with these types of projects, equipment changes, whether that's the trucks or the chargers. In our case, the chargers that we had originally spec'd and worked with the manufacturer on and designed this site around were ultimately obsolete by the time we were ready to put shovels in the ground. So we have a great partnership with our charging manufacturer that we had selected on site. So we were able to pivot and adjust and move to a different charger and cabinet selection that was ultimately a great upgrade for us, and the timing worked out extremely well. But that comes with some re-engineering, redesign, possibly permitting adjustments and downstream modifications on the utility side. Those are all things that can be challenging to forecast out with such a long duration to build out, but they're all things to keep in the back of your mind and have those early conversations with your providers to ensure that you have a strategy in place that mitigates any type of challenges that may come along there. Just another call out, from a driving characteristic standpoint, and this was a great learning for us. We did some pre-production testing of this equipment, knew some of these challenges that came along with the deployment or transition to battery electric trucks. But though the trucks very much look the same, they drive with similar characteristics. The actual range variation or efficiency of these trucks is much more significant in a kilowatt hour per mile as opposed to MPG equivalent, meaning appropriate driver training and follow-up to ensure that not only do they understand how to drive these trucks effectively and safely, but also efficiently. And the continued education there to ensure that they grow a comfort level with throttle input and regenerative braking and some of those characteristics that are just maybe the same, maybe different than diesel, is just a call on something to think about as you make this transition with your fleet. And then similarly, equipment costs, that's been touched on a couple times, but of course, equipment costs are constantly changing as well. We're all very hopeful that these costs will start to come down in the near future, but there are some absolutely cost headwind challenges as you think about this type of deployment and how you plan from a budget standpoint, moving into a long duration rollout. Next slide. All right, Rachel, I think that's all I got.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. So appreciate it. We'll bring you back for the Q&A as well. And we are going to finish off our presentations today with Dave Mullaney, who's the Chief Transformation Officer with TrueCurrent. Dave, thanks so much for being the anchor to our presentations. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rachel. And a quick introduction to TrueCurrent. We're not a fleet. We actually come at the problem from the opposite end. We have a long history in the deployment and operation of electrical infrastructure, so a lot of experience sort of solar, battery, microgrid development, and a pretty good track record of applying that type of expertise within the fleet world with fleets that want to electrify. So deep experience working with utilities, really understand a lot of the issues that come with supply chains to procuring a lot of this equipment. Worked for many years with local governments and authority having jurisdictions to manage the permit complexity of all of that. So we're excited to partner with fleets on these types of projects. Next slide, please. And so one of the ways that the way that we partner with fleets starts with the strategic planning process of electrifying vehicles, and we take it from the beginning, which is if a fleet that's just beginning to want to electrify its vehicles, typically is trying to answer, in our experience, 4 questions. One is, can I electrify? So questions like, are the routes that I drive technically possible to electrify with existing vehicles? Can I charge them in the amount of time that they have at a depot, or would I require some sort of off-depot charging solution? Can I get the power to charge these things? So working with utilities to understand how much power can be available to site, or how can a client manage load in order to use what power they do have more efficiently. Can they build chargers? So will permitting restrictions allow that? Will the landlord relationship allow that? That's sort of those are some of the big questions in like the feasibility with electrification. Oftentimes the next question is, do I want to? And for most fleets, that's a TCO question. So how much money will I save by switching to electric to electric from diesel? Can I generate my own electricity and save money? How will my maintenance costs change? How much is this vehicle going to cost? And we all know it's going to be a lot, but also if I plan on selling this vehicle after a holding period, how much will it be worth? And how does that impact the TCO? With these costs being as high as they are, a question that very quickly comes is what types of grants and incentives are available. Those vary by location. But then also is there utility incentives available? Now we're no longer playing in the diesel world. We started playing in the electric world. And so there's a whole other universe of potential incentives and rebates out there beyond just the governmental. And then also, given the cost of these assets, does it make more sense to lease them and buy them? How does that affect my costs? But all of this rolls up into a TCO question of, am I in my end state better or worse off in continuing to operate diesels? And that's oftentimes the overriding question for many fleets that are trying to electrify. But not the only motivation. Another one is, do I have to? And this was obviously a much bigger question about 6 to 8 months ago than it is today. But I think it still remains for many fleets. So the famous one was the Advanced Clean Fleet Regulation with the waiver request was withdrawn, so no longer really on the menu. But I think some fleets are saying, is it gone forever? Advanced Clean Truck does remain on the books, and that is impacting the ability to procure diesel vehicles without procuring electric vehicles. So all these questions around, do these sort of stick-style regulations, are they going to impact me as a fleet? We try to work through those with them. But then also there's a close relationship between policy and TCO. Questions like cap and trade schemes that do affect fuel prices, like the low carbon fuel standard in California, other types of programs as well. And then finally, the sort of wild card is, are there other decision factors that are leading me to potentially want to electrify my fleet? Do I have sustainability targets? Do I have an internal cost of carbon? Do I have customers or investors requiring this stuff of me or asking for it? Does it come with operational risks? So for example, rolling blackouts, how would they affect me? How can I manage that? This is sort of the overall decision calculus that a lot of fleets, when they first are looking at this this journey are trying to cope with, and it's pretty complicated. Next slide, please. And I think the issue is that not only is it complicated, it gets more complicated when you start applying it to a large network. So each one of those questions around policy, TCO, feasibility, resilience, they somewhat change per state. And so that maybe they change by geography, but they also change over time. So how your economics or your regulatory compliance look in California is vastly different than how they may look, for example, in Nebraska or Texas. And many fleets that want to electrify tend to have depots where their vehicles return to base. And so trying to figure out how does the picture change from depot to depot? How do my economics change? How does the feasibility change? How does my how does the resilience value of those projects change? It's all highly site variant. So when you look at a map across the country, you say, ooh, how do I prioritize these sites? Where should I be going? Which ones makes most sense to do first? And that's one element of complexity, is the geographic element of it. But another one is the time-based element of it. All of this stuff changes. So if you looked at the regulatory picture, and I've got a map of 2024 here, it was really different just a year ago. Versus now, I would say a lot of the forcing functions are definitely have gone down in priority, the regulatory forcing functions. And so if you were looking at the problem a year ago, you probably had a very different sense of where did it make sense to start first than you may have today. So keeping track of all of this complexity across time and across geographies, and ultimately making a decision that makes sense for your fleet from a TCO perspective, from a compliance perspective, from a customer perspective, can be really complicated. And so I think the mission of True Current is actually to try to work through fleets and help solve those problems, to say, where can I do this? Where do I want to do this? Where really should I do this? And begin to make sense of that. So if you don't mind advancing to the next slide. We have sort of a 3-step process that we go through with fleets to work through this. And we call it our roadmap. But it really starts out with the basics of trying to understand what is a fleet trying to accomplish with electrification, and how are they, what are the relative importance of the different goals that they may have, and what are the constraints within which they are operating. So, for example, many fleets would say, I really want to make sure that I'm regulatorily compliant. I want to make sure that I'm maximizing my TCO. Maybe I have a limited capital budget, or maybe I don't want to have expensive assets on balance sheet. And this is how my fleet's operating. So it's where we try to sort of understand with the fleet, what are they trying to accomplish? What are the constraints that they are operating in? And sort of overall, what's the context of fleet operations within which that is occurring? And then the next, we sort of try to pull that together into a high level strategy where we understand sort of fleet costs, fleet regulatory obligations, how the fleet's operating. We really try to get into high level assumption driven scenario analysis of that, and come together with a high level plan. And then I think that the third part of that is trying to put that plan into action at specific sites. And so if you don't mind advancing to the next slide, going from, I think, and try to keep it brief here, going from a high level assumption driven plan towards a plan that is tactically implementable at specific sites starts to become a bit of an exercise in data analysis. So what we really do in the project identification and prioritization stage of this, of our partnership with fleets, is we really get deep into the data. Work with fleet telematics data to try to answer those questions around which vehicles should be prioritized based on feasibility, on cost. If they're all being electrified at a single depot, how would you charge them? What types of load do these add up to? How does that fit in with the ability for the utility to provide power? And then overall wrap this up into sort of a TCO view and say, does it make sense to electrify a site, and which vehicles within a site should you electrify, and how should you charge them? And then we kind of also take this view of like, Can we improve it with distributed energy resources? So can solar and storage improve your TCO or your resiliency or your carbon emissions results of your project? And then we go back to the beginning and say, given all the analysis that we've done, does it make sense to actually develop a site? And then the final slide, please. That's and then I think when you get to the decision of yes, I do want to develop a site, the TCO, the policy aspects, the feasibility all look good. You're sort of just at the start of your journey. Then you get into this question of you need to actually do it. So you have the EPC elements of it, the permitting, the utility engagement, and then ultimately, even once you've built it, these things are not, I would say, set it and forget it. Your overall fleet electrification, your charging infrastructure, the potential for supplementary generation and storage, all of these things need to be managed in order to actually continue to be cost and operationally optimal. So even once assets are sort of deployed in the ground and operating, working with clients on making sure that the operation is well maintained, that it's cost optimized, that all the potential revenue and cost available from these types of infrastructure are available to clients is our long-term ongoing relationship with them. So with that, I'll leave it there. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dave. We'll have all of the other speakers come back and join us for our last couple minutes here. We have some time for some Q&A. And thank you to all of our audience members who have submitted questions. We've got some really good ones here. I'm looking forward to asking you guys. So one of the things that was a common thread between all of our speakers here, we all talked about what this roadmap looks like, this path to success that you set at the beginning of your electrification journey. I'm very interested to hear from fleets, and Dave, from you as well, as you guys are working with your customers. How does that path change as you learn more? As you're learning along the way, what does it do to the path that you set out for yourself originally, and then how do you account for those changes to ensure success? So I'll pose that to the whole group, and whoever comes off mute first can take it first.
I guess I'll start off. So for us, it changes every year. We replan each and every year how we're going to deploy and what we're going to do based on the previous year, but also based on some of the environmental or the current circumstances. Again, in and around the inability to gain infrastructure equipment sometimes changes us to shift what terminal we're going to go to. How many vehicles we're going to buy, when we're going to deploy. So each year is kind of a new and changing year, and we try our best to forecast out what's going to happen, but sometimes you have to make some adjustments on the fly. But we go through an entire planning cycle every single year with respect to electrification, just based on what what's currently going on in the business.
Yeah, and for NFI, I would say a similar process there, especially with things changing. I think the technology itself changing. It's a very important process to stay a part of and ensure that at least at an annual basis, you're revisiting and making sure you're aligned. For us, we have customers that we're looking to help meet net zero commitments for, so making sure you're kind of staying in tune with the stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maybe to recycle a line from Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Like, we found that you get punched in the mouth many times over the course of this deployment, and they can come in many forms. Like, the utility sometimes punches you in the mouth with what they say about capacity. Suppliers, in terms of like lead times, they punch you in the mouth with how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. Policymakers with the availability of grants or the structure of regulations constantly changing, funding sources are exhausted, restrictions on availability of funding change based on fleet size, and we've seen all of this happen. Big things like ACF just disappear. This is constantly affecting the calculus of how fleets decide, like, do I want to, do I have to, how should I do it, how long will it take, and recalibrating to make sure that for all of these given circumstances, you're still focusing on the right assets at the right places and operating them in the right way. That is a really dynamic picture, and you got to sort of stay up to date on.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Jeremy, anything to add before we move to the next question?
No, the group really hit on kind of all of the aspects in the way of in which we think of it as well. I think that the big piece there, especially, is we're partner very closely with our customers, and like Alexa said, we similarly have initiatives with our customers to help them meet their goals in alignment with our goals. So there's that constant partnership there and planning phases that have to go along with trying to meet those durations and timelines that all come into play.
Gotcha. I think it makes a lot of sense. I believe, Dave, you had said this. I may be misinterpreting that, but it's not a set it and forget it kind of plan. It is a let's constantly revisit this. That makes a lot of sense. Alexa, one of the things that in your presentation you mentioned about the importance of partnerships, and Jeremy, in your answer here, you brought up, these partnerships and how that ensures success. Can you provide a little bit of guidance or a piece of advice for how a fleet who's just starting out in this, how they go about defining who their partners are going to be to see them across the finish line here?
Yeah, I think first stop would be ACT Expo. Definitely the meeting of all minds, and you'll find a lot of helpful people. I think the piece of advice I would give is really just start networking and asking questions. There's a lot of charging as a service companies too that are out there that want to help understand and help you figure out, right, exactly what, kind of Chris showed of what part of your fleet works for electric right now, and make a plan. So I think getting out in front of, that ACT Expo crew and being able to start networking within that. And that might be, if there's a fleet, whether it be reaching out to me or someone else that, can kind of share our experience or specific providers that have helped us. But I think if you're just getting started, especially the smaller medium fleets, I think, using those charging as a service providers as some knowledge just to understand what infrastructure is and kind of what you're looking for. I think that's a really good start, because that's kind of where they're looking to understand and help as well. And then consultants are always, beneficial, especially with the ever-changing regulations. So for us, both of those come with price tags if you're going to actually be utilizing the service, right? So I think calling out that ACT Expo and networking and things like NACFE are really where you're going to be able to find a community that can kind of help at least with those initial questions.
Gotcha. And at the risk of hamstringing myself with the end of time here, I also want to ask, and this is for the group, I'm curious, somebody had asked, what can state and local governments do to remove the barriers that we've been talking about here, make adoption of this technology easier for fleets? I'll pose this to the group, and I'd love to hear from each of you.
So for one thing, that I would say it would probably go along with, and we're a larger fleet, but for us, a lot of the times we can't use state funding because it has some type of a scrap requirement. And for NFI, we don't have trucks to scrap. We've got our tractors at less than a 5-year life cycle, right? So there's not going to be a 2009 truck that they're necessarily looking for. So I think just one conversation to have is, I understand that we need the support for small and medium fleets as well, but someone does need to be on that bleeding edge, and we do need infrastructure to be standing up before the small and medium fleets could really even, start to look into that themselves. As you've seen from both mine and Jeremy's presentation, those larger deployments of battery electric technology take a long time. So, us having the ability to pay a consultant and to have various help there, I think that's what I would call out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the that's definitely a big thing, is making sure that the grants and incentives available are actually aligned with how fleets operate. So there's a lot of restrictions on, or there's preference for smaller fleets in some states, I would say, but really smaller fleets, the cost and complexity of this is so much that funding is basically never going to be taken. It's the larger fleets who have to lead the way, but a lot of times the funding is structured in a way that they can't get it. Scrappage is another sort of way where it's the funding structure is out of touch with how many of the fleets who would like to do this are actually operating. But I would also say maybe some ways that states can be supportive beyond just the funding is a lot of the permitting is just like a very, very complex, and it plays out at very local levels, and everything is just like a battle of attrition. And there's no replicability to how you do any of this. It's like each new depot is a whole new world. Beginning to streamline and standardize how those types of conversations happen, and this is true like across utilities, across towns and counties and every other jurisdiction. It's just standardization of the process would make it so much smoother. So to the extent that states either via PUCs or via their own legislative processes to just make the whole process easier to navigate, like I think would be hugely important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe one of the other call outs I'd make there, and I don't know how much control that some of the states in particular at least would have in partnership with their utilities, but the electricity cost is a dramatic calculation to the overall TCO of operating these trucks. In a lot of states, a lot of utilities do not have EV rate structures, especially in the scale and scope of what we're doing. So working with those utilities to try to foster a pricing model that makes it a viable solution for these types of deployments is, I would say, is a critical aspect. But then the other piece is just understanding the scale and scope of these projects, and when a fleet such as ours or any other large fleet comes and asks for a considerable amount of energy, that's not of a dramatic surprise, because I've heard of and I've experienced almost being laughed out of the room when you talk about some of the potential energy requirements to do these types of deployments.
Yeah, I guess I'll just pick up on a little piece that David kind of talked about. I guess what I look at is kind of it's investing in the resources that would help limit the long waiting lines in terms of utilities and getting involved with approvals and having more inspectors and people out there to help support the infrastructure build around electrification. So whatever states and provinces in Canada here can do to help inject more resources into the EV building side of the business, I think would be more beneficial as well.
Great. Well, this has been such an honor. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to share your expertise with us. This has been great. And thank you to our audience who stuck with us a few minutes over the hour here. This is the end of our second BEV unit session. Thank you everyone for joining us. In 2 weeks, we will be back here for our third session, which is titled Charging Depots, Networks, and the Economics of Fleet Electrification. Remember to go back to the landing page of the session on runonless.com to take the quiz. Make sure that you accept the invitation for the workshop when you see it come through. And make sure that you're connecting with us on social media. We have all of our handles linked out here. But we so appreciate the time that you've spent with us here today. A very special thank you to our speakers, and have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time.